pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Since we have no consent agenda tonight, as this was an off-scheduled non-business meeting, we'll go right to public comment. A reminder that public comment for any item or topic on or off the agenda is always available near the top of the agenda for individuals to share their thoughts. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes per person. Please use public comment even if you refer to something later on the agenda. Virtual public comment will be available through Zoom. Please raise your hand and you'll be promoted to panelist and unmuted, or in person at the microphone in Millennium Conference Room B. And you'll just introduce yourself with your name and your address.
Sure. Okay, my name's Christine Jusome. I teach 4th grade at day school, and I am the Teachers Union president. Hello, nice to meet you guys. I first want to start off by saying thank you to those school committee members that tried to get the override passed. I know a lot of hours went into it, and we'll just try again at another time. And I just wanted to let the school committee know that the WEA officers, we met with Dr. Chu and Courtney Moran last week to go over, once we found out we did not get the override, we needed to meet and then figure out the reduction in force process, which they have handled very well. And again, I know a lot of time went into the seniority list and checking for certification for all of the staff members in making the correct movements. So tonight, I just wanted to have 2 requests. I know a big decision is going to be made tonight in regards to the amendment from town meeting for the $378,000. And I know that we all look at that amount of money and we all look at it through a different lens. My mother in recent years has told me, Christine, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I'm an all or nothing person. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a positive and sometimes it's a negative. I interpreted the amendment to cover our interventionist salaries or hourly rates for next school year. And I know that is up for discussion tonight and how to interpret. We, the WEA, we are hoping that all of our interventionists can stay for next school year. I don't have to tell you what they do. I will just summarize that they are able to fill in the gaps of whether it's a student's reading foundation or math foundation. They are the individuals who build relationships with a small handful of our students, and it's really crucial that the gaps be filled in a student's misunderstanding of concepts, because the goal is that a student over the years won't need to be tested through our special education department. I think if we allocate that money toward the interventionists, it will end up saving money in the long run by alleviate them having to be tested. So Catherine, I know when we were standing at Westford Academy last week for the override, I said I can't even imagine if the interventionist positions go away. And I said it will feel like 1996 again. And you said, wow, Christine, that's a very specific year. I said, well, I got hired in 2000, and we have always had interventionists. We've always been fortunate if our students needed intervention. We call it what I need, a win block. So I was thinking today, what would it be like? It would be like using a computer in the 90s and being asked to fulfill all of our daily obligations, and it just doesn't seem logical and it doesn't feel fair. And then when this appeared in my mailbox on Friday, it's the Strategic District Improvement Plan, and number 2 and 3 really spoke to me in regards to our interventionists, and it says ensure equity, assess our organizational structures to ensure equitable learning environments for all of our students, which to me, that feels like a direct correlation. And then my second request for the night is due to enrollment numbers currently at Miller, their second grade team has 5 classroom teachers, and at day school, our third grade team currently has 4 teachers. And our administration has let us know that there are approximately 25 students on an IEP. So if we kept it at 4, it would be, it gets to the equity thing. It says number 3 is promote social emotional well-being, prioritize mental health and wellness for all of our students and staff by exploring strategies to minimize academic and/or social emotional pressure valves that negatively impact performance. So to me, Westford has always prided itself on having small classroom sizes. The most I've ever had in my 24 years is 23 students. And right now, if we were to try to take the Miller second graders and move them over to day's third grade, it would be maybe 24 in kids per classroom, with an average of at least 6 IEP kids per class. And then that's before move-ins in the summer. So I know I might not get all that we request tonight, but I would be appreciative if you would consider allocating the funds to keep our interventionists and to add an additional classroom. And I just had one question. I know it's not interactive, but maybe throughout tonight's meeting.
You make it short, you're a little over time.
Okay.
I just want to make sure.
No, you know what? I'll hold it. I'm over.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Christine. Do we have anybody online?
Do you want me to?
Well, let me switch just to, we'll go back and forth.
Patty?
Yep. Patty, you're being promoted to panelist.
Just give her 1 sec.
Be quiet. Let's-
Try again.
No, it's just quiet. Can you turn the volume up?
Yep,
Hello, can you hear me?
that's better.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Go ahead, Patty.
Okay, sorry. Patty Wong, 4 Birchwood Drive. First, I wanted to thank the school leadership, especially the school committee, for all the hours put into educating the public on the school budget, battling misinformation on social media, and explaining the real impact of a failed override. Like many others, my heart dropped when the election results were announced. I wish we could give everyone more time to process the impact, but the fall WA semester is right around the corner, so I have a few questions to ask. As you know, I've already emailed them, and Mr. Toomey did say that he would announce some changes later this week, but I wanted to just summarize my questions below that I have now. My first being, will students who aren't picked for an AP lottery be able to sit for an AP test, and will WA provide any support materials for those students? Second, to accommodate the students who are not picked on honors level lotteries, will WA modify the prerequisites for AP classes that only honors level students can meet? With the reduction of the options to double up in math, the ability to take AP calculus is severely limited. Will the district make any changes to advanced math evaluations in 7th grade so that students' ability to take a critical STEM AP isn't actually decided in 7th grade? Will WA guidance be keeping track of which students were selected for honors or AP lotteries so that the lottery spots are evenly distributed between students? And lastly, will WA change the policy that prevents students from taking classes outside of WA to meet prerequisites or graduation requirements? Prior to the override failing, I understood this to be a financial equity concern, which made a lot of sense. However, one of the loudest arguments against the override was that parents should be paying out of pocket for supports and services that weren't being reduced, that were being reduced. I hope WA keeps that in mind when considering changes in policy. Personally, I think voting for the override was the best chance for an equitable education for everyone. By voting against it or not voting at all, the definition of equitable education is now a little different, and students who work hard to meet those prerequisites shouldn't be penalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Melissa Glasheen, 3 Downing Place.
Thanks.
And I am currently the math interventionist at Stony Brook Middle School. I speak to you today not only as a math interventionist, but as a mom of 3 girls in the Westford school system. I understand you will be speaking this evening about the budget amendment for intervention services. I understand also that the amended budget is intended to be used only for elementary and not middle school. As I've been told, I have no position next year. Please allow me to share my viewpoint so that you might consider my unique perspective. Middle schoolers are a distinctive breed. Some days they are babies, the next young adults. All days they need guidance, support, encouragement, and yes, academic help. If we think back to when we were in middle school, weren't we trying to figure out who we were? You might share with me similar questions we'd ask ourselves. Am I athletic? Am I artsy? Am I cool? Am I smart? Middle school is a time many of us start to label ourselves. Oh, I'm terrible at math, or I'll never understand poetry. Math intervention in middle school is a huge opportunity for us to instill confidence and influence these young learners while they are deciding who they are. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the light bulb when a student finally understands a concept, the increase in confidence. Maybe I'm not bad at math. These students thrive when given the resources. Here's another point to consider. I believe the budget line item for middle school intervention is $90,000. That money is split amongst 4 individuals. 4 people, totaling $90,000. It doesn't take a math teacher to quickly calculate the small amount of money each of us takes home. And yet, Westford is fortunate enough to have highly educated, overqualified, passionate folks take on these positions. From a budgeting point of view, please think about the return on investment the Westford community receives for this amount of money. Knowing we're in the midst of a budget crisis, please consider my words as you discuss next year's budget this evening. I'm always available to discuss any questions you might have about middle school math intervention. As you can tell, I am very passionate about it. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
I think she went over 2 minutes, so can I go over 2 minutes too? Just a bit. Don't think I've met all of you yet, but I go back a long way, so I'm giving a perspective tonight if I could. Okay, if I can open this up so I can prop my book. Oh, Lord. Things were easier. Okay. Hi, I'm Judith Culver. I live at 34 Stonebridge Road. My 3 children, who are all well into their 50s by now, all graduated from Westford Academy, and my daughter's been teaching in the system for over 25 years. I've served multiple terms on both the school committee and on the Robinson School SAC, and I have a perspective I just want to share a little bit with you. I want to summarize briefly my view of the threads that led to the Westford intervention program, which is relatively new. In traditional elementary school model, back in the 50s and the 40s, I'm not that old, the model students at the end of the year could not keep up with their peers and couldn't meet the standards, repeated the grade. Yeah. Or if they were older, they were socially promoted so that they weren't learning anything new, but they were out of the way of kids who were way younger. They weren't in 2nd grade when they were 10 years old. They were socially promoted is what it's called. And then many of those, as soon as they were 16, they left school. This is what happened. Interventionists in Westford are a logical extension of the Westford Public Schools philosophy to shape one child at a time, similar to what you were speaking of. Okay, thank you. Interventionists in Westford, I just read that, almost 40 years ago, Westford began to add services to give struggling students and immature students confidence in their academic learning. In the mid-'80s, the Pre-First program was started. This was the program between kindergarten and 1st grade. It was very successful. It was, I think it was sort of dubious at first. People didn't really want their child not going to 1st grade, but they didn't want them staying in kindergarten either. So this was a really successful program. I thought it was still here. My daughter said it's not here anymore. That's what interventionists are for. So the intent of it, this was very successful. The introduction of the math and reading interventionists at the elementary, middle, and high school levels gave students individualized learning to develop the tools needed to reach the grade benchmarks for their particular peer group. Tonight, you are discussing the additional funds that town meeting awarded the school committee for their budget for next year, FY25. A school committee has just 3 overarching functions in the state of Massachusetts. You hire the superintendent, you set policy, and you control the budget. And tonight, you're taking one of those functions and you are working with it. We all know that the bottom line of the school budget can only be voted by town meeting. They cannot dictate how you're going to spend it. And during the year, if you move things around the line items, it has to come back to you for approval. So you do control exactly every penny in the school budget. I'm sure you know that. You are the only body that can direct the additional funds that were added at town meeting. You do not have to follow what town meeting's intent was. You can have your own priorities. That is perfectly legal. It may not be what other people want you to do, but you have the ability and the authority to do that. But we also need to remember these are not one-time funds. As several people on posting have said, this is just a one-time shot. No, it's not. These funds are forever in your bottom line, and they enhance the bottom line starting for FY26. So that's a good thing if you want to look at what it, besides helping children, what the funds do is increase your bottom line. And in times of 2.5, that's critical. That's another comment. So I encourage you to restore the interventionists at each level. It is a very successful program and has benefited students in Westford one child at a time. Each child is individually worked with to draw out the capacities that they have and don't think they have or don't know they have. It's very successful, especially in the elementary schools. The interventionist program has continued to lead to successful students who contribute to the excellence of the Westford school system. And every child that benefits at every young age is a child who is not having problems in 4th grade or 7th grade. These are children who continue to build on the skills and the knowledge they got in the interventionist in the early elementary schools. It's children who become very strong high school students had either help or they already knew how to do the things that some children don't know naturally. And this program is one of the strongest things that the Westford school system can give to the children.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Judith.
Okay.
I have nobody on the line.
There's nobody else with their hands raised on Zoom. Anyone else in the room? Start with your name and address.
Jamie Holmes, 20 Moore Road. I know everybody here, it's been a long week for all involved, the people behind me, people in front of me, myself included. Without getting too emotional, this is going to affect everybody negatively. We all already know that. The intention of the money that was mentioned in the amendment is very exact. Christy Bates, who made the amendment, gave explicit reasoning. Over 1,000 people at town meeting approved it. I think it would be very, it would prove the point of the naysayers that are out there that are the part of the reason we didn't get this override. If the money is not used as Christy intended it to be in her amendment. There are other people that could have done something similar and clearly, obviously, caused more confusion. I understand that this could have been confusing for other people, but the intention of this money is to save the elementary school interventionists, who I don't need to explain any further what they do. I think if there is further things that need to be done in the future, there is some work to be done on Dr. Chu, Courtney Moran, and everybody else's part on really figuring out what the replacement to that would be, because I don't think that 6 academic coaches are the replacement to that. So starting the work now, if that is something that you're looking at to change for fiscal year 26, you should be taking the people that are in this room that keep coming here, that stood up for everybody during all of this, during the override work, that really have been the faces of the override. I would really recommend having conversations with all of those people to find out what the best next steps would be. But I really hope that what was requested at town meeting is honored here tonight, given the fact that it was very exact and explicit. There should be no confusion on what the intention was. And I understand that there are a million different ways that we could think to spend this money. Quite honestly, my daughter would be benefiting from middle school intervention next year. I'd love to sit here and say I would rather you save that. But that money was for the elementary interventionists, and that is has been a very successful program. I've seen that with my own eyes. The reason my daughter's getting any math instruction right now in her 5th grade class is because there's an interventionist that is able to support the long-term sub in there, or she would not actually be receiving any math right now. So that's all I have for tonight. I really hope that we can all honor that and move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you. Nobody online again. Anyone else in the room? Okay, thank you very much for those of you that spoke. We'll move on to informational updates. I don't think there is.
No,
Is it kind of
we
an
don't,
off-
yeah, not with this, not in between the meetings. I mean, I'm sure there are things to share, but we just won't have anything.
Okay. I was just gonna make for school committee updates a reminder that Thursday is a half day, because I feel like that sneaks up on everybody. And then obviously a welcome to Tom Laflemme and Lori Oliver, and a re-election success for Catherine. So thanks for joining us, and we'll get through this together. So we will move on to the first business item. Do you think it makes sense to start with your slides?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Thank you. So, so I did put together short slides as talking points. I do think before we really engage in the slides, I do want to acknowledge how difficult the past week has been, I think specifically for the staff, right? The number of difficult conversations that have had to take place over the last few days, although we had been preparing knowing that there were 2 different possible outcomes. I think it would be safe to say that no one really wanted the outcome that we have in terms of the impact that it's had and the difficult conversations that so many of our principals have had to have with their staff. And so as we continue to talk tonight and honoring the voices that are in the room, people are here, sharing their thoughts. We're going to continue to talk about the budget tonight. And so there are going to be people that we're not going to discuss bringing their position back. And I want to still just acknowledge the fact that, we've delivered bad news to a lot of people. And I'm going to share some of that data with you in the slides that I think will just help with that. But with that, we'll go ahead and go into the slides. So just again to sort of set the scene, as a reminder, Article 4, which was the no override budget of $67,207,356, was approved with a $378,000 amendment. So that then gives Westford Public Schools the approved general operating fund of $67,585,356, which is 2.57% increase over the FY24 budget. And so the difference there between what the Article 2 budget was, which required the override, between these two it's a reduction of $2,131,480.
I think that means Article 1.
Did I say Article 2? I meant Article 1. Thank you.
okay.
You know what? What's nice is that I can change that because it's live. So let me change that before that goes anywhere. Thank you. I was so focused on.
Do I need to come out of the slideshow and go
Nope.
back in?
Nope, you're good. You're good. It'll be live. Well, oh, you will.
Yeah.
Actually, that's true, but that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, now you can go back and see it's already changed on the, there we go. Okay, so anybody watching right now, it does clearly say Article 1. Thank you. So the next two slides are going to show you, this was the last group of FTEs that we had shared in our budget presentations. So if you remember, Jenny had done a really nice job breaking down between the override and the no override. If we focus on the number at the bottom here in the bottom, what is it, the bottom right corner, we were anticipating a reduction of 70.2 positions. So if you go to the next slide, this is the way in which this is played out as of right now. One of the things I also want to stress as part of the conversation is that we are still in this process. So this is reflecting the conversation that Christine had mentioned about, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, the conversations that we've had, but there's still information changing, and so some of the things might change a little bit in terms of how people respond to the information we've shared, right, in terms of whether people accept positions or don't accept positions. But if you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner there, the difference is actually 67.2 as opposed to the 70.2. I know there was some question. People were like, well, the override didn't pass, so now what's going to happen? And we're like, well, I honestly think we were very accurate in the first place, and so this just kind of shows that's what we were talking about. So that's the impact that we're looking at right now. Three of the differences here, or two of the differences. These three positions, they actually are reflected in this slide. So on the second line, where it says 12.6 FTEs at Westford Academy, in the previous slide, if you did that math, that would have come up to 13.6. So there's one difference there that I'll talk about in the slides later on. So there's one change there. And then this slide is reflecting, the previous slide reflected an overall 8 positions at the elementary level, right? We reduced 4 in the override, and then we were going to reduce an additional 4 without the override. So now this slide shows 6. That's what the recommendation is, and I'm going to explain that in a couple of slides as well too. So that's the difference. Those are the 3 positions that's different between 67.2 and the 70.2. Okay.
And this still has the interventionists on here because of pending discussion.
Yep.
Just to be clear.
I was comparing the
Yep.
previous. I wanted to compare that number with this number, and then we're actually going to talk about that in the next slide a little bit more. So I didn't know Christine was going to speak tonight, and she actually did speak a little bit about what I was going to explain. I appreciate that because it was helpful. The idea that what a reduction in force is specifically, I think people hear that term a lot, right? But one of the things I sort of want to lay out there right away is that there's a Mass General Law Chapter 71, Section 42 specifically talks about the reduction in forces in schools and with school employees because it can be a little bit different in the private sector. I know one of the things that I just heard anecdotally, which I thought was unfortunate, was somebody had shared, if individuals had shared that that they were being let go, that then some people in the private sector would then be wondering, oh, well, what was the severance package like? And there is no such thing. There is no severance package. And so I think that's really important for people to understand. So in terms of the MGL there really talks about the fact that the superintendent if there is a reorganization or a decrease in enrollment or budgetary concerns, then the superintendent is able to do this reduction in force above and beyond what any of the contracts might say. Now, most really good contracts have specific language about reductions in force as well too. Ours do, and they follow the laws, but they just outline things very specifically. And so that was one of the things that Christine was talking about. If you look at that second bullet point, that we have a specific process in an order that works in our collective bargaining agreement, that we create, if there is a need for reduction in force, we create a standing committee that has 3 members of administration and 3 members of the association, so WEA, their association. And so those 6 individuals would meet together and they would look at the reduction in force, considering all of the elements that go into it, looking at the seniority list, and looking at it for two reasons. First of all, just I think multiple eyes is always helpful, right? If you're looking at things based on certain numbers. But the other piece is that as people are being let go, many people have recall abilities. If within the next 2 years positions were to become open, certain individuals in certain positions would have the ability to be recalled, and they would have first right of refusal to that position. And so it's important to make sure that everything is in alignment. So that's the thing that the standing committee is going to look at, and they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about the methodology that went into everything. If those two groups are in agreement, then you move forward with the process. And so I will say we had a long meeting last week, and again, it was a difficult conversation and difficult meeting, but we were clear in our methodology. We were clear in the lists that we had put together and the way in which everything would impact each other, and so there was agreement. If we weren't in agreement, then we would seek outside arbitration. That's what the collective bargaining asks for. But we were in agreement through this process, and so that people are aware of that. One of the things that we talk about is just the difference between professional status and non-professional status teachers. So in Mass General Laws, there is I think it's actually Section 41, talks about the professional status of teachers specifically, and that typically after 3 years of service, they can earn professional status within their district. And so that does have some implications to it in terms of how and if people are let go. Non-professional status individuals don't necessarily have the same rights to recall or might not have the same process if they were to be let go outside of a RIF process, right? So that's just one of the pieces there. So we're looking at all the different ways in which people are impacted. The one thing that's really important for everybody to understand is that those are sort of technicalities that we're talking about as we're just trying to go through the logistics of everything. These are all people. These are all excellent employees, whether they're first year, third year, 10-year people. They are positive people, and we know that our staff is truly fantastic, and they have a positive impact on students. And so even when we're talking about all the different roles, whether it's an interventionist, whether it's an ESP, whether it's a classroom teacher, when we start talking about the difference between professional status and non-professional status, it can sound a little bit, it can undermine, I think, individuals' their humanity, and I think their professionalism. So I just want to be careful about that.
And their dedication.
And their dedication,
And
thank you.
I think some of this is just so helpful because the community hasn't gone through, we haven't had this drastic of a staff reduction.
Correct.
In the last couple years. And so not a lot of people maybe know that this is how it works. It's not just I don't know.
True.
That there is a whole process to it, that there's a list based on date of hire and certifications all go into it and everything.
Right, thank you, yeah. So the other thing that we just wanted to share was how our employees have been impacted specifically with this reduction in force. So 60 employees, not including the interventionists. So to Tom's point, the previous slides included the numbers and the interventionists. So not including the interventionists because at this point the interventionists have not received any letters. Okay, we know that this conversation is still taking place. Back to the CBA, we have specific language in our contract that has a timeline associated with it, and so we are expected to notify professional status teachers by May 15th, if possible. Things can always happen. We know that there's things that can happen at different times, but that's the spirit of the contract, that you would do that. The MGL and what the expectation is across the state for schools is truly June 15th, unless your contract has more specific language, right? So if we didn't have a specific date outlined in our contract, then the default would be June 15th for us. And I will say some of our contracts don't have that language in it. Some of them do, some of them don't, in terms of the different units. But I was sharing that for, I'm talking about the letters. Okay, so one of the things I will say, one of the recommendations that Courtney Moran and I had heard from different attorneys, talking to a number of districts going through similar situations, was that the safest thing to do is to give everybody a letter, right? And then just bring people back, or just give all non-professional status individuals a letter, or, and while that might be the safest thing to do, that was something we talked a great deal about, that it's not the right thing to do, right? And so we already knew that the morale, that this has a negative impact on our morale, and so we wanted to be very, very, very careful and very specific, and make sure that we had really thought through and dotted I's and crossed T's before we were really ever giving somebody that final information. So that has been a goal throughout the process. So back to the letters. So 60 employees either received letters on Friday or are in the process over the next couple of days of receiving letters. We told them that they would be receiving letters over the next, well, starting Friday through up till Wednesday. And if you look at the numbers that I've shared with you, so some of them are receiving a letter saying they will no longer be employed. 13 of our van drivers, 3 of our administrators, and 20 teachers received a letter saying that they will no longer be employed by Westford Public Schools at the end of this school year. Then some people received a letter that was saying that they were going to have a change of their position, and it would be sometimes teachers will change positions within the school, like go from 3rd grade to 4th grade, and although that might be a significant change for the individual, we wouldn't necessarily think that if they're staying within their building and still teaching within that age range, that it wouldn't warrant a letter. It wouldn't warrant, getting an official notification that they were changing it to that degree. But we decided that anybody who was moving from building to different buildings, or if they were changing a content area or something to that effect, we wanted to make sure that we were documenting that and explaining that in a specific letter from central office that was outlining what that was going to be. And so 2 different administrators received that, and 22 teachers received letters saying that what they're doing this year will be different next year. They will be working with a different age group or in a different building next year, or with a different content area.
Can you just add a little bit there about that's like an offer?
Thank you. Yes. So when going back to this whole reduction in force, one of the things we look at is we look at multiple certifications. We look at what people are qualified to do, and if there are other things that we can have people do. So that's where we might be moving people into positions that they might not necessarily be looking forward to, but we know that we can save a job if we put them in that position, right? And so that was our goal, is to try to save as many jobs as possible, try to move people into positions that we knew were open, and or move people into positions where there was somebody with significantly less seniority.
Can I just, on that point, ask for some extra information? On those positions that are being offered to those staff members of change, is there a date of acceptance for that, kind of accepting that change in their position? Because as you said, some staff members may not want that change, or may not like that change. And if a staff member rejects that offer, does it automatically then kind of go to our staff members who don't have that same offer? So
that added a layer of a question in there, so I appreciate that additional piece of information, and I can tell you were breathing
Right.
as if you wanted to jump in
Right.
as far as the timeline goes, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do that.
Unfortunately, there isn't, that option. So if we had many positions to offer, that might be something different, but we're certainly in a difficult situation right now. So when somebody has been reassigned to that position, it is the understanding that that will be the position. And the only other option would be to resign from the district if they don't want to take that offer.
And is there a date on?
There
when they
isn't,
have-
there is if people are being recalled, then there's a timeline.
Yeah,
But in this scenario,
yeah.
the contract doesn't specify a timeline, and so we felt that there shouldn't be a timeline, right? So, I mean, It would be, that's their position for next year.
Yeah,
And so if they don't want that position, then they would need to inform us.
but there's no time.
There is no
frame
specific
to-
timeline.
to inform you.
To your point, if someone does not want to accept one of those positions, then yes, that opens that position up potentially to someone who might be qualified for that, who we have also let go, who that's where we would then be looking to see, okay, well, who would we offer that position to? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. The last piece was that we have had some retirements and some separations as well, too. They are not counted in that list of letters, even though when people retire, we do give them a letter. The letters I'm referring to are different letters. So we have two of the drivers have decided to retire, and so they'll be retiring. 3 of them had actually resigned earlier in the process, but since we first started talking about this, and now they've resigned, and we've actually already had to transition some routes to be outsourced, just to pick those up, rather than rehiring those positions only to then let them go again. 2 teachers who are part of this list of reductions are retiring, and 2 teachers are resigning. So, I know, Tom, you had asked me a question about like open positions that might exist. So what you're gonna see when we're talking about the 67.2 positions, those are truly reductions in positions. We do have, and sometimes that's been part of the letter changes and things where we've been offering other open positions to people. Those positions will stay open and we'll be hiring for those because though we can't reduce those, right? So it might be a special education teacher in one grade, or it might be a different classroom teacher or a different content area that was not being reduced, if that makes any sense. In general, at this moment in time, I don't have the exact number of those because that does sort of, that changes with each one of our personnel updates, right? Okay, any questions about this? Yeah, Bill.
If there is no hire at that, in some of those open positions by the start of the school year, could you use the waiver process and maybe, is that foreseeable to get some of those positions
That's
filled by?
Right, the hardship waiver is always an option if you've exhausted everything that
Okay.
you've been able to
Yep.
exhaust as far as posting, interviewing, and then demonstrating that you were not able to hire a person
Yep.
that met that criteria. As you know, there's no more emergency licenses that are being
Yeah.
issued at this time from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, so that piece would be out.
Can I just ask a follow-up to clarify what that waiver process is for those people that are not aware of it?
Well, the process.
Or what it
Yeah, because
would
you kind
allow
of
us
just
to do?
described.
Well,
the-
it's triggered by the district, not by the individual who is looking to have a hardship waiver. And it's meant that, a principal will have an open position, will have gone through the process of posting for that position, hopefully interviewing for the position, and then doing that several times, at least twice, before demonstrating that we weren't able to find a candidate to fill that position. So then, at that point, the principal is responsible for issuing a hardship waiver to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and that's their ultimate decision about whether they agree that we are able to hire that individual that doesn't have the certification in that area.
Thank you.
That's why when you see.
And it's only good for 1 year.
Yeah. You'll see DESI will report the number of licensed teachers within a district, right? And because there might be some communities that might have more teachers that are on that hardship waiver and they don't have the appropriate license for what they're teaching at that moment in time. You are able to teach up to 20% outside of your licensure. So that's another option that tends to be a little bit more typical at the high school level, but that's another aspect of it. The hardship waivers, we try not to use them because we want to have licensed people in place.
Thank you.
Yep. So, thank you. So the next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to talk with you tonight, and hopefully it makes sense through this process, when we were looking to reduce our override request, and coming out of our FinCom hearings, we explored the appropriateness of increasing our food service offset to supplement some of our head custodian salaries because of the direct support that they provide to the cafeterias, because the food service account is highly regulated and you can only use those funds to support the food service program. Now, the 2% budget, we were not looking to reduce in any way because that was already our bare budget. So we did not apply the food service offset to the non-override budget, which means if you go to the second, well, I just said that in the second bullet. So the third bullet says that if one of the things I would like you to consider this evening is that if we choose to move forward with increasing the food service offset in this now approved budget of the $148,000, that would release $148,000 from our general operating fund, which would allow us, my recommendation would be that we pull back those two elementary sections that I mentioned earlier, when I said that originally we said we were going to have to reduce 8, and my recommendation to you now is only to reduce 6, and I'll show you the data why I'm saying that in a minute. But this is how I would suggest that we would be able to fund that, okay? Because we didn't include that in the 2%
But we
budget.
weren't focusing on that budget at
Correct,
that point. We were
correct.
so
We were looking
focused-
to reduce the override
The,
request. Right,
yes.
Right.
And that was out of FinCom. So-
Right, yeah. So that's what that means. Are there any questions about that, or I'll show you the data for just for the different enrollments. So the first, I'm gonna explain it. Good, okay, I forgot I did that. I'm trying to remember that people might read this without actually listening to me, so I added this slide in so that if anybody reads it, then the next 2 slides will make a little bit of sense. So the first slide, number 8, is going to show you what the original no override sections proposal was, okay? I've put, and what you're gonna see is that the largest sections are projected to be in grades 4 and 5 at Abbott and grade 3 at the day school. Again, something Ms. Jussom alluded to earlier. The slide 9 is gonna show what the class sections would look like if we kept one of those sections in 4th grade and the section at 3rd grade, so that they would keep those class sizes. They would be consistent with the rest of the district, with the exception of Abbott grade 5, because Abbott grade 5 is still going to have the numbers of 24, which is a concern. The bigger challenge too that we have in general is just Abbott. We've always kept those class sizes smaller at Abbott because those rooms are smaller. Physically, they're smaller rooms. So if we look at those 2 slides, if you look at the first one, Catherine.
This one?
Thank you, yes, and thank you, Valerie, added original proposal set of people looking at it, they also know the difference too, so I think that's important. So if you'll notice, the difference here is, the red numbers is what I shared with you that would be changing from the A budget, if you will, or the override budget. And so this shows that the class sizes, for this is 4th and 5th grade at Abbott. The average would be 23.5 and 24, and then the average of grade 3 at day school would be 24. It'd be average of 24. Now, your class, the guidelines up through grade 5 has always been to be 22, so it is exceeding that. And I know that some of the concerns people had shared was that these class sizes don't seem very big to me, especially when you compare them to other districts. And I will say there is some truth to that. If you go to the next slide, you'll see, so the suggestion would be that we actually increase from 6 to 7 in grade 4, which would bring that class size average to 20, which keeps it in line with the rest. No change for grade 5, because we're only talking about 2 teachers here in the first place. And then grade 3, it would dip, is that grade 3? It should be, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Grade 3, it would dip to just, the average would be 19.4. Which again, those stay in line closer with the rest of the district. Grade 5, they are our oldest students, which is the only rationale for using the 2 for the 2 lower grades, 3rd and 4th, rather than grade 5, because the recommendation was just for the 2 that we'd be able to afford with that amount of money. And additionally, I want to say a concern that I have, we knew that if the override didn't pass, that the class sizes in FY25 in the elementary schools were not going to explode. We told people that, we were clear about that. Our concern, and I know if you look at this and if the mathematicians in the room start dividing these numbers, rolling them up and divide them by lower numbers, there is no way for FY26 and FY27 that we can reduce further in the elementary schools without the class sizes ballooning and exploding. Okay, because once you start getting to those numbers, now you're looking at they will be 27s and 30s. So that's, I just want to take a moment to talk about that. So my thought here is, again, if we are to sort of maintain these for an additional year and giving a little bit more equity outside of grade 5 at Abbott, which I know is a challenge, and I've been talking with Mr. Meyerson about that, because I know he's concerned about that as well too, but he's trying to think creatively how he can use the space in the building. That I think just keeps everybody on a little bit more even footing, which I think is appropriate.
I just want to underscore the point he's making there, which is that the projected deficit for FY26 for just schools without the override can range between 1.6 and $2 million. So
Same reductions we're seeing this year,
right. So
same scale next year is
so
what
the idea that, like,
we're potentially facing.
where would you use this money? It's towards classroom teachers.
Right.
Because we know we're going to be sitting down again, making that many reductions again.
Right.
So.
Right.
And the offsets we're using, we've maxed that out from the food services. That's 148. I assume you kind of calculated
Yeah.
how much.
That was part of when we were looking at just the
Yeah.
offsets in general, looking again at the different accounts and what we're setting and what we're planning to
Yeah.
use. This one, we just hadn't rolled into
Into this
scenario.
But this is the max we can
Yeah.
offset the custodians.
It's what we think, it's what we think is appropriate, based on the number, based on the hours that they support the school.
Yeah.
So in that terms, it's the max.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any questions about the data there with that? So that's a piece of my recommendation this evening, okay? And I'll kind of recap it as we talk about it, because again, we're talking about the overall budget in general.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and go to
This one.
the next slide. Right, so we had a lot of questions about what are the impacts of WA, and so I was able to get this information. First of all, Mr. Toomey shared with me the idea that right now they believe that they're about 2 weeks behind where they would typically be with the scheduling process, which I would say, under the circumstances, is actually really good. That's kind of, that's better than what we anticipated. I know it's better than what they anticipated.
Can you just clarify that? 2 weeks behind?
Behind where they would normally be in the scheduling
Scheduling to
timeline
registration.
process.
classes,
Yeah.
getting
So
teachers.
that means that they might have schedules in hand.
Well, let me finish. I'll
Oh,
keep
okay.
going. I see,
Okay.
that was
Sorry.
kind of the beginning,
Sorry,
was that they're about 2 weeks behind.
2 weeks behind doesn't mean anything.
I get
if
that, I
okay,
get that.
sorry.
So, they're still committed to releasing the schedules as soon as they're available. They typically release them in June before the students leave. They're thinking it might not be the end of the summer, which is what we had sort of projected, right? But I'm hesitating to say that I also don't think it necessarily might happen before the end of the school year, right? But it could be early summer instead of late summer, which is possible. If they're able to do it before the end of the school year, then that is fantastic.
And that all comes out through Power School.
Yep, and they have a whole process for that. He is also, I'm sharing with you the sound bites. He is going to communicate this specifically with the WA families this week when they have a little bit more specifics ready. But because one of the things that it takes, what they're doing right now is they're loading the new information now, right? So they've been doing that. They've been going through the process of having difficult conversations with people, which needs to happen on a certain timeline, and then also doing the work of loading all of these changes and these potential sections into the new matrix, right? So then what happens which is a good thing with the technology, is that once you have everything loaded in, then you will push the button, right? Push the go button and see how the matrix will work. But it is going to send back errors. It's going to send back a lot of different things that might require them to move an entire class and try to find it at a due time. So that's what people need to understand. That's what can take some time, so that they don't want to release the schedules until they've made sure that all those major errors that they're getting system-wide have been fixed. Students might still have conflicts, because that's kind of typical with a high school schedule, is that individual students might have a conflict or even something that they want to change, or a class that they didn't want that they've ended up with in things like that. So that will still be happening, and they'll be setting up specific office hours for students to address scheduling issues again, right? So that's kind of the big piece, just for getting everybody to understand that the way in which all that works.
Can I ask one question before you dive into the
Yeah.
specifics? When looking at the decision process then at WA, because it's obviously very different for the other schools, through the RIF process, is the selection based purely again on seniority at WA, or do you look at the course numbers and who's taking, what are the lowest level kind of class options or class numbers, and base it off that, if you
I do.
understand?
I know what you're saying. So primarily WA first, when Mr. Toomey and the team were asked to identify the potential reductions, they're doing it trying to look at student interest and what those class sizes are for the most part. That's what they're trying to look at, and looking to see, okay, where can reductions take place that still provide as much breadth of opportunities as possible for the students. And then within those reductions, you start looking at all of those different qualifications, right? Whether or not, and I will say, I think an important piece for people to understand, we use the word seniority a lot. Seniority is technically the tiebreaker, right? So when all things are equal, right? If both the individuals have the same certifications, if they both had the same performances, right? So like if they've both been proficient, if they didn't have sort of corrective action in their performance ratings or anything like that, then all things are equal. And so seniority then becomes the tiebreaker, right? So that is just an additional, that kind of goes back to the whole RIF process in general. But so at the academy, they looked at similar to the same thing kind of happens at the elementary school, except it's not in different content areas, where we again look at the sections and we look to see, okay, where might we be able to reduce a section? And the principals will work with us on that, and then they might say, well, we might be able to do that just, for example, in 4th grade. Well, it might not be a 4th grade teacher that ends up getting moved, right? It could be a 5th grade teacher that gets moved, and then there's different shuffling that takes place within the building. There's a whole bunch of different pieces that could be involved there. So now when we talk about what the impacts of WA are looking at, so this is going to talk about each department, the reductions that were in the department and the impacts that it's had. So we have the English, there's 2.6 teachers. So their class sizes are going to be going between 24 to 27. Instead of having different sections of journalism that might have been offered, first of all, that provide students opportunity anytime you have a singleton course at Westford Academy, so if a class only meets once, then that becomes a challenge for students to take that course. Because without a doubt, without fail, they're going to want to take two different classes that might just be a singleton. So journalism is now an example. Journalism might have had multiple sections of journalism. They might have had multiple levels in different sections because they're really, writing for the paper and doing different things like that. So it's possible to have different students at different levels working and getting feedback from the teacher at the same time. Well, now that section, there'll only be one section of that. Well, that one section might end up running opposite one section of a music course or one section of a specific different content area that's an AP level course that they want to take. That therefore it becomes problematic, and then students have to make choices. And that's difficult, but that's something that people should understand.
When it says, like the 1, 2, 3, 4, does that mean,
That's the level.
so is that all one class?
Yes.
One section,
Yep.
and then those kids just have different?
Yeah, so for example, journalism, again, like, they would be journalism 1, journalism 2, journalism 3, journalism 4.
Yeah.
And they might have been journalism 1 and 2 met together, and then 3 and 4 met together, or like I said, they could have had two sections of journalism where all of those students are in there.
Yeah.
Their transcript, they're advancing in their work, and they have different expectations.
Sure.
However, it helps with their transcript because then the school is seeing that they've taken journalism for 3 years,
Got it.
right? As opposed to taking the same course 3 times, they know that they've committed to this activity in this program. Sometimes you'll see that with music ensembles as well. It's just colleges tend to understand the way music ensembles work, where they don't necessarily understand the way a section like journalism might be, because some schools that might be a discrete course and it's not necessarily attached to something like ghostwriter.
Yeah.
And it's also happened in languages, I believe, where honors is in the same
Yeah, that's the next
same
slide.
time,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
But
yeah, we'll
it's-
talk about that as well, too. So then you'll see the one section of film and literature, and it'll only be for one semester, right? So it's just gonna be one course throughout the year. It's not even like it's gonna be offered both semesters that they would have that choice.
And these are considered electives?
These are electives. All of those are electives.
Yep.
Yep. In science, there was a reduction of 2 teachers. So we're knowing that the biology class sizes are going to increase. Specifically, there would be higher sections in honors biology. The physics classes will increase, and we would most likely see the higher number in AP physics. The marine biology class will increase, and they're not going to be able to let students have a third science class. So they showed us that 24 students requested this year to take a third science class this year, right? So it doesn't mean
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time. So it's still not what they wanted to do, but it doesn't mean that they're not able to take 3 classes over their career. It means that they wanted to actually take 3 in 1 year, and they're not going to be able to do that. So if we move on to math, there were 2 reductions, both of which are retirements, but we're not filling those positions, so that's an important thing for people to just understand. So there will be 2 less teachers in the department. So I think a big thing here is that the AP stats, they're only going to be able to offer it for juniors and seniors. And if you see there, they had 67 sophomores requested.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So that's a lot of students who were trying to take that class their sophomore year for a specific reason, that they'll still have time to take it later, but they wanted to take it in their sophomore year so that they could get an AP class under their belt, so they could try that. I mean, there's a lot of different things that people consider in doing that. So there will be, that will be something people have to,
Is there any option that could be changed to like a sophomore, junior if the demand is higher? If the demand for that is earlier on in your high school career?
well, I think they could change it moving forward. They're responding to the requests right now, and I think it's right to give the seniors
Oh, yeah.
the option. But I think in the
Yeah.
bigger picture, one of the things that they're talking about, and they actually talk about it right here, okay,
Yeah.
is sort of changing prerequisites, right? They're going to need to reduce the number of sections of AP Computer Science just down to 1, so that means there'll be fewer options for students to take that class. Changing the prerequisites for Java Honors and AP Computer Science, and this is kind of linked with number 4, which is reducing the sections of Exploring Computer Science. Right now, Mr. Toomey was explaining to me that they have Computer Science A and Computer Science B, and I think in order to take higher level classes, you have to have taken both of those levels. And so what they're looking at is knowing that they're going to be reducing those, they'll be changing the prerequisites, knowing that it really won't be feasible for students to take both A and B before being able to take the other levels. So that is something that speaks a little bit to what you were saying, Catherine. You know, like the idea of looking at the future and how can they make some adjustments that can still allow people to access these. And then one of the things that the math department has been able to do for a little while is that they've been able to keep the class sizes in their college prep level algebra class lower to really provide, I think, more individual attention for students in the algebra class who might need more support. And those class sizes are just going to jump. They're not going to be able to do that, so they will increase. So here we're seeing a reduction of 1.2 teachers in history. So their class sizes are going to increase. The AP economics section is going to be reduced from 2 to 1, and there may end up being some limited seats in certain electives. They haven't worked through exactly whether that would mean the same thing as the juniors and seniors, or because they just want to look at what those outcomes are. In the visual and performing arts, there was actually a reduction of 2 teachers. 1 teacher has transferred to Stony Brook, and then 1 art teacher is being let go. And the impact is going to be Foundations of Art 2 won't be running next year, and Painting 1 and Painting 2 won't be running next year. And then the ensemble classes will be consolidated in terms of bringing the band and percussion students together. There were multiple sections of orchestra that will meet in one section now. That's what that means. They're still allowing for semester and full year options, which is something that they've tried to do recently to provide students opportunities to stay with the program, even though they had other requirements and needed to take other classes. While there are no reductions in PE health and wellness, I still wanted to remind everybody what the class sizes are in PE health, and they're very large. So we're looking at large numbers there, and they are reducing the senior health elective from 2 to 1. We can go to the next slide. This will talk about our world languages. So you'll see the 1.8 reduction in world language across what that impacts Spanish, Latin, Mandarin, and French. Mandarin 4 wouldn't be running. They are researching possible options to provide that, whether it's a online component or dual enrollment or some type of option. French 1 and Latin 1 won't be running, which will make it impossible for someone to take level 1 of the new course, right? So that happens sometimes with freshmen. Freshmen might decide they want to change what they were taking. They didn't want to continue with what they started taking in middle school, or they might not have been taking a language in middle school and wanted to start a language at the academy. So Latin 1 and French 1 won't be running next year. Then, to your point, Tom, we'll see more combinations of the levels of the classes. So you'll see for Spanish 5, it would be all different levels would need to be meeting at one time. And I will say, bringing levels together for any course can be challenging in order to really differentiate and meet all the students' needs. The expectations between an AP class and a college prep class can be significant, specifically with the languages as well too. So I think that's just a different thing to be looking at. But you can see all the different combinations that they have there, and that their class sizes will be increasing. Some might be over 30. The last piece is the transfer of the LMS. So the library media specialist, there are 2 at Westford Academy. 1 is being moved and is going to the elementary schools, and it will be bumping a teacher with less seniority in the district in the elementary schools. And so that's going to reduce the amount of collaboration that'll be able to take place. It'll also could impact the access to the library spaces themselves, and then there's also just other impacts that they are not sure of yet. So that's the only one that says TBD. Now, this is where I want to address the 13.6 to the 12.6. one of the things that was originally listed that would make it 13.6 was one of the counselors. After the budget process started, we were notified that one of the counselors at WA is retiring next year. And rather than letting somebody go and then needing to potentially, that person losing their opportunity to stay with WA, knowing that this retirement was in there, I would suggest and propose that we would use one-time funds just to pay for that one position for that retirement. Originally, so that was why, that is my suggestion that we do that. So that is why that number is 12.6. And it would only, that is, I don't like to use one-time funds for a salary, but that is because it truly would just be that one additional FTE for that 1 year, rather than letting somebody go, only to lose one of our counselors, knowing that then that position would be open the next year. Now, so that's, any questions about the WA?
Just a question about
Yes.
the art teacher.
Yeah.
My understanding was ceramics was going to be cut. Is that still the case, or?
I believe no. I believe that when they first were looking at the sections and the interest, they were concerned that ceramics might be what they were
Very
identifying,
popular.
but it's very popular.
Right.
So I believe that what they've done is they've looked at their staffing, and I think based on the staff that they are planning to have next year, this would be the courses that wouldn't run.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that ceramics is running.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I just kind of raise a point on the world languages? The one thing that kind of frightens me here, I mean, the whole thing frightens me,
Yeah.
to be honest. But in particular, seeing that we don't have French one or Latin one not running, I'm thinking of students in middle school who typically don't always get the option of doing those, starting those languages
Yeah.
in middle school because they're in academic support. And sometimes those students are in they have language-based learning difficulties. I'm very concerned that they're potentially coming up to the high school, and I suppose what is considered a more, language-based learning difficulties, kind of friendly language to learn is Latin, and the fact that Latin 1 wouldn't be running for that. I would hope that Mr. Toomey is kind of keeping an eye on what 8th graders, freshmen will be coming in, to really kind of support those students who either A, haven't had the opportunity because they were in the academic support class in the middle school, but also then really trying to figure out of those students. I mean, we talk about equity, and for our students who need that extra support and to not have access maybe to a language that is more attuned to their learning needs is quite concerning
Yeah.
in my mind.
I will follow up with them
Yeah.
on that. I do know that they are looking at the 8th grade numbers as well.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so those numbers are playing into
Yeah.
this, so maybe they might know something different about next year and what students have already
Yeah.
suggested, but that's a good question.
Like
a good
Latin
thing.
may not always be the most popular,
Right.
but it might be the only
Right,
really.
but they might have also already, students who are already picking a language for the first time might have already selected something else.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So my concern was along the same lines. And I don't think we always think of Latin as, it's considered a dead language, right? But it definitely is a different learning style. So I would hope that the middle school is also kind of advising the student that, hey, this might be a good option.
Yeah.
And, the numbers may not show it now,
Right.
but that's something that we need to just, again, keep an eye on.
Right.
Is there a way for students to catch up over the summer to maybe be ready for a Latin 2 or that type of thing? I mean, I've heard of people doing that in the past. That's.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't know. Yeah. So,
I was just going to say, in a similar vein, with some of that middle school ramp up to WA, would math also be, is there potential for any of those, like 8th grade options to be affected here? Or is WA looking at some of those projections, like math readiness for?
I don't know if if I'm exactly following you. I'm trying, like, so the
yeah.
impact on eighth grade, the
Yeah.
impact on the
Do you
middle
mean, like, are
school?
we taking anything away from freshmen at WA that,
Right, yeah.
for math? that
Based on the
would impact?
projections of what eighth graders are taking right now.
I think the impact might be the algebra sections, right?
Yeah.
Because I think students who didn't take algebra in eighth grade, which is, it's a significant percentage of the eighth grade, that then their class sizes have been traditionally smaller for their freshman year of math, and now they won't be as small.
Yeah.
So that would be the impact that I would
Okay.
imagine.
And of course, we're looking at impacts for this year, not
Right.
what's going to happen in '26 if we don't have
I think,
additional math.
I just want to
support
keep
and
us
whatnot.
going
Yeah.
to the next
Yeah.
slide, so,
Sorry.
Because it does actually kind of wrap
Sorry.
us up a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah, thank you.
and then we can open it
Yeah.
up, sorry, Tom.
So these are, I kind of wrap up the conversation tonight a little bit. The three considerations is the $378,000 is approximately the amount needed to retain the elementary math and reading interventionists, which is 26 in total. That was addressed earlier. That is what the discussion was on the town meeting floor. And so I think that's something that we're all cognizant of and where we're of. And that is I say approximately, but Jenny will say that is the amount necessary for that number of staff. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to clarify for people following, this is different than the food service offset that we're talking about.
Yes, it is.
And can you just clearly state your recommendation of this $378,000?
So I haven't yet.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't yet. No, I agree.
Okay.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I just want to say these are the different considerations, and then I'll tell you
I
what.
got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So one of the things that I've shared with you is the elementary classroom, the elementary schools that they project to have higher class sizes. That piece that I've described in here, and I talk specifically about the concern about FY26 and FY27, sort of to Valerie's point, which might have been why you were saying that. My recommendation is that we use the food service offset to help us keep that number of reductions to 6 instead of 8 at the elementary level. And then the last thing that we just shared with was all of the departmental concerns at WA. Primarily, the one that jumps out is the world language. More specifically, and I will say at that moment in time, I wasn't layering in the entry courses as much as I was thinking in terms of the seniors who have sort of projected out certain needs that might not be able to get those met. So those are the things for the talking points for you to discuss. It is my recommendation that we utilize the $378,000 to retain the elementary math and reading interventionists for FY '25. And we continue to explore that model. I do think that there's things that I think there's always ways that we can improve, but I do think that there's things that we can look at in order to, specifically what is the exit and entrance criteria for those supports that I think we need to make sure that we articulate more specifically and clearly to teachers, to parents, about those supports as well. One of the things that was mentioned earlier too, I know people have talked about it. It is true that how the $378,000 is being funded has not been identified. And so we talk in terms of whether that would be from free cash or something that we have called one-time funds. But it is clear that it is in our general operating fund, which is our Westford Public Schools budget. It is the general operating fund. Now, the point was made that, that will never go away. Optimistically, that is true, but in order for that to go away, there would have to be a significant decrease to our allocation for it to be removed, right? Because it is part of our general operating fund. But we don't know where the money's coming from. So the impact that it might have in other places, and it could turn around in FY26 and FY27, could be so complicated that we find that those funds don't necessarily exist. Nor, honestly, would I commit to always continuing to use those funds for this same purpose. Because as we talk about FY26 and FY27, we will continue to be looking district-wide at what those needs will be and where those reductions would have to come from.
Right, and so like, even if we find out where that money is coming from, and this is part of the, usually this much scrutiny isn't at this part of the budget stage, but this is part of the normal budget process that the state, budget goes through its steps. And then if we find out the final governor budget, I think July 1st or something, and we always have adjustments that are made at special town meeting in the fall. Obviously, there's a magnifying glass on it this year for this cycle, so we don't know today where that money is coming from. The most responsible thing to think about it is that it could be one-time use funds.
Good.
And I think it's also important to think about that the 378 pales in comparison to the projected deficit we think we're going to be sitting down to address in FY '26.
Right.
So,
And the $2.1 million that we've just reduced.
Right.
From our, what we said we needed, because that's the other piece. I didn't really, lay into that, but again, we've been talking in terms of the fact that the majority of our budget is people.
yes.
The majority of that $2.1 million are in those slides that I showed earlier, which is all those people.
So that was a meaty slide deck, and it's very difficult topics, seeing in black and white the results of the community vote. So I'll open it up to discussion, but we have sort of three things to touch on. The $378,000 amendment, the food service offset, sort of a vote, I think, on the whole package of these reductions. And in the packet is also a memo of the fees that we usually approve as part of the budget cycle every year. Like bus fee, preschool, early arrival. There's no changes recommended to any of those at this point.
Because we looked at that earlier, before the budget process. We reviewed the majority of them through the budget task force process.
Yeah.
And we saw that our fees were higher than our comparable communities.
Yeah.
And so what we do think is that we will need to, now that we know the outcome of the votes, we think that, we do need to look closely at that fee schedule for FY '26. But our recommendation would be that we don't change those fees for FY '25.
Okay, so I'll open it up to any discussion, comments, feedback, questions.
Could I have
Yeah, go ahead.
a question on the world languages at WA? You're saying there about it's a concern for some of the rising seniors. I don't know how many that's impacting, or if it would have any impact on potential college placements. If we have an option to use one-time funds, and I don't know the cost, so is that something we could review so that, students who kind of had anticipated making choices for their senior year or whatever college trajectory or pathway, I know there was also mentioned that some other options are being looked at, but I think it's something.
First, I would want them to be able to continue their research to figure out what the options are, right? I do know years and years and years ago, when I was a high school administrator and went through a process where we had lost certain language teachers, finding those high-level courses for some content areas were very difficult, whether it was online or, through a dual enrollment. That was a long time ago, though, so.
I was going to talk about dual enrollment.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there are now more options. And I know that Principal Toomey and the curriculum coordinators are looking at that. We just don't have an answer for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would encourage to bring back that information
Yeah.
as soon as possible, basically.
I mean, on the other stuff, I completely agree that, in terms of the interventionists, they very much told us at town meeting, this is what they wanted the money set aside for, this is what the town voted on, so I would absolutely, what's the word? Support, thank you. Sorry, brain's not functioning tonight. Support that's where that money goes. I think it's the right thing to do. And also, just to personally speak to the impact those interventionists have had on my own kids. you know, it's not lost.
Go ahead.
I think it needs to be acknowledged, the communication that we got requesting, equity across the district. Right? It needs to be put out there that, yes, there are significant impacts at the high school. And significant impacts at the middle school that have not really been outlined here tonight. But I also think it was clearly stated that this was the intent. I think it is a reasonable and responsible approach to provide the best foundation to our education system. Poor foundation is going to just crumble at the higher level. So I also would support restoring the interventionists to the budget. I also believe that it is the responsible thing to do to take that offset from the food services and apply it. I've been, actually, I think one of my children was in one of those small classrooms for grade 5, and I think if you added 2 additional students in there, it's recipe for disaster. And it's not just, at that point, it's not just the equity of the number of students, but also the learning environment that they can't
And
have
the research of class sizes at the
right.
early grades.
And they can't have the flexible learning space and things like that. So, I think that both of those are very reasonable, and I would support them. I do, again, share the concern about especially Latin 1, because that is a very different language and a different skill set to address. So that's something that I would also encourage us to look at. I would also, along the lines of the interventionists, I would encourage you to convene some working group of some of the interventionists from the different levels, and yourself, and maybe some of us, to look at that model and look to the future. This may not be sustainable. We know this. This may be one-time funds. And I personally would like to hear some feedback of how it can be done as a collaborative way to move us forward into what might be a different model. So, okay.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, Sean?
My thoughts and reasoning for supporting this, the vast majority of them have already been articulated much better than I can say, but I'm for using the 378 specifically towards the 26 elementary level interventionists. I think all of us were at town meeting. It was clear this isn't a round number. It's not 500,000. It's not 400,000. It's very specifically almost earmarked for this.
Yeah.
So I think the will of the people, much like we have to accept the election results as what they are, the will of town meeting was to use the 378 for this purpose. And I think it's consistent with what we want, right? We have had this discussion as a committee as to costs and the like, and interventionists serve an integral role in kind of capturing that student who's not necessarily on an IEP or a special education student, but who needs that extra help. And as educational leaders, oftentimes we focus on the students on the poles, right, and who are very high succeeding or who need a lot of extra help. And these are the students who are kind of in the middle. So putting a focus on that, I think, makes sense with where we are as a district right now. And it's a good bang for our buck, right, which has been discussed too. It's not hopefully what we're saving in increased special education costs will make up for the money that it's costing us right now. So not looking forward to the discussions next year, but I think that we have clear guidance as to FY 25. Thank you.
Bill, you looked like you were going to chime in.
No.
I guess we've had like 2 or 3 people weigh in on the 378, so if we want to stay on that
Yep.
for a minute.
Yep. No, I mean, I would agree with all the points. the foundational core to the district is the beginning. And although the impact is stark at the high school level, there has been, there's no easy way here, but the call has been for this money to be used, to echo what Sean said, to the interventionists, the K to 5, so.
Yeah. Did I miss anybody over here?
I totally agree. I think it's very important that these elementary students get the help that they need at that point, so they can be successful in high school.
Right. All the electives don't mean much if you.
Yeah,
Right.
if you don't have the skill base.
Mhm.
Right.
And it's clear that that money was meant
Yeah.
for the reading and math interventionists at the elementary level. So I think we need to respect the voters on that one.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for everybody weighing in on that. Any other pieces of this that with the comments sort of went towards the interventionists, but obviously there is more to this. We never really took that vote on this list of reductions, so I guess this would be the last, I think we owe it to staff to give this clarity from tonight. That's why we scheduled this off-cycle meeting. So if there was any other feedback on how.
I will say I do appreciate that the fact we've managed to get that extra 4th grade and 3rd grade teacher in. Because as a teacher who has taught up to 33 kids in the class at an elementary level, bigger class sizes are extremely difficult at that level. So,
It's amazing how big a 22 student class can seem at times, let alone.
never had 22, so that feels like luxury.
Let alone a 27.
I'm really glad that we can do that.
Well, I also just want to echo my thanks for sort of a fresh slide deck, right? Because it's been the sort of the confusion, the
Level
the
set,
roots.
as you used to,
Yeah.
as you
Well, like
used to use
still
before.
just the hearsay we heard, right, was that these were threats, that these were not real, and they very much are, so.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. It's really sad. It is really a sad vote. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Food service, 378. I guess I'm looking for a motion on approval for the FY25 Westford Public Schools budget in the amount of $67,585,356.
So moved. Oh,
Second.
Sorry, that was Catherine and Sean. Any final? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And a motion to approve the FY25 school fee schedule.
So moved.
Second.
Is that Murray? And Sean, thank you. Any last comments on that? Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Do we need to take specific action on that food service offset, separate of the,
I interpreted that as
Yeah.
being in that $67 million number.
but is it a cost code shift? I'm just
Yeah, but you-
clarifying.
I don't think so.
No, and you wouldn't need to,
Okay.
you wouldn't need to vote specifically on that.
Okay.
The idea being is that, and I think it's clear that the spirit of this conversation, the spirit of that vote is reflective of the conversation.
I just wanted to make sure you had what
Yeah,
you
what we
needed
need. Thank
to
you, I
actually
appreciate
move
that.
forward.
Which
Yeah.
is why we now read the number in the motion.
Yeah, right?
Well, we're scheduled for a regular business meeting next Monday, so we'll pick up where we left off. Thank you, everybody, for making time for this off-schedule meeting. I really do appreciate that. I know we really wanted to give that clarity to our staff. As difficult as this is, that's the least we could do. So, Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second, seconded.
Bill is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.